together, apart. Long before its present usage was understood, those who came to synagogue to recite Iskor understood the meaning of together apart. During Iskor, young and old, synagogue regulars alongside more infrequent attendees, some coming for the first time and others for long that we can remember, all arrive for a moment of intentional memory. This year, our physical apartness only amplifies the Iskor feeling of together apart. When I review my sermons from over the years, I can honestly say that I never overwhelmed you by telling you stories about my children or my family. And when I did, it was because I believed that my words could trigger, both in me and in you, useful thoughts and emotions. But Iskor was always different, perhaps because I have been reciting it for 40 years for my father and 6 years for my mother. I know that after my 18 High holidays at Bitora, most of you already know that my parents were actors in the Yiddish theater. I literally grew up behind the scenes of theater rehearsal rooms and audience seats. 50 years later, I have internalized incredibly diverse images that I have never been able to forget. I remember my parents reviewing their theatrical scripts, and I was forbidden to interrupt them. It was a sacred moment. It was their passion, their vocation, their profession. And from that effort, my sister and I were educated and had bread on our table. I remember myself being 7, 8, 9 years old, walking among people during intermission, trying to listen on them discussing their opinions on the show. I recall the applause that filled my chest with pride. There is one powerful image that I will never be able to forget. My father is on stage, minutes away from the beginning of the performance, looking through a slit in the curtain to see how many empty chairs were left in the theater. I can imagine that every empty chair represented a blow to his ego. Empty chairs were my father's worst nightmare. I am standing here today in front of over 1,000 empty chairs. And while yes, this is not a theater, and yes, this synagogue should be empty this year, I am reminded not only of my father, but of the importance of empty chairs and what they represent in Judaism. A chair in Judaism is much more than just the physical structure that holds a person off of the floor. Depending on the use of the chair and who has sat in it, a chair can be glorious. I will just give you 3 examples. Each synagogue has what we call the Kiseh Shel Eliyahu, the empty chair of Elijah, the prophet, upon which we place the child on the day of his Brit Milah circumcision. It is considered the chair of covenant, commitment, and hope. Second chair, in the book of Samuel, in the Bible, we read about King Saul and how he wanted to invite David to dinner at his house with the excuse of celebrating Rosh Chodesh, the new moon. In reality, he wanted to kill him because he was jealous of his popularity. Jonathan, Saul's son, and David's close friend, tells him, "Do not come. I will miss you, but your chair needs to remain empty." The third chair, Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav chair. Nachman was the great-grandson of the founder of Hasidism. You might have seen their sticker and hats all over on a trip to Israel. Nachman, Meuman. A few years before the rabbi died, an admirer made a magnificent carved wooden chair for him. When he died in 1810, his disciple kept the chair in his memory and placed it in a most important spot at the synagogue, right next to the ark. After he died, his followers sought no successor. They wanted to keep the memory of Nachman intact. The other Hasidic groups ridiculed them. They were called the dead Hasidim, for they had no living Rabbi. but they had a chair, an empty chair. In the 1920s, during the Cossack attacks in Ukraine, the chair was taken apart and pieces of it were given to various families who were escaping to the Promised Land. Every person who carried a piece of that chair survived and made it to Jerusalem. There, they reassembled the chair. It looked exactly as it did when Reb Nachman sat in it. You can see it today in the Bratslav synagogue in Mea Shearim in Jerusalem, still placed right next to the ark. Iskor is the moment when we not only reassemble the memory of those that left the land of the living, but also our relationship with them. Iskor is the moment when you confront your empty chair and reassemble your memories and your relationship with the person you remember. Because we know that we are who we are because of our relationship with them. In our own day, the metaphor of the empty chair is used in psychology, particularly in Gestalt therapy. When a therapist is dealing with a patient who having difficult time letting their emotions out regarding a key person from the past, they are being asked to imagine that person sitting in the empty chair in front of them. They are then told to say all the things to the empty chair that they were never able to say face to face to the person. The empty chair isn't really empty at all. It contains the memories and feelings that existed between two people. More importantly, the empty chair allows people to work to resolve conflicts and emotions whose resolution is impossible due to the death of the other party. There are times when we may have things to say, questions to ask, advice to seek from a parent, a child, a grandparent, teacher, or friend who is no longer alive, and we can recreate our needed dialogue with the help of an empty chair. Our last family trip before COVID-19 was to London. In London, when you are riding the subway called the Tube, you will hear the conductor caution to mind the gap, which in our English means watch your step. Watch out for the space between the subway car and the platform. We don't want you to fall. This Iskor calls us to do the same. It calls us to mind the gap, to be cognizant that we don't want the physical distance created by the death of our loved ones to become a spiritual distance. My father was very sensitive to the idea of empty chairs in the theater. Each of them, I imagine, made him feel a bit of failure. In the theater of life, emptiness, it's different. Feeling the emptiness generated by the empty chair that your loved one left behind is the best testimony of life of success. We miss them because we love them. We miss them because they marked us. And even with the passing of more and more years, no one will occupy that empty chair, so empty and at the same time sanctified with their eternal memories. I see my father looking through the crack in the curtain, and he leaves me one more teaching. Iskor means to draw the curtain of history and realize that there they are. Please rise for the Iskor service.